Hey everybody, I'm Mark Nelson, Managing Director of Radiant Energy Group. It's a consultancy that works on energy issues, mainly in the nuclear sector. So on my prep call for this panel 3 minutes ago, I learned the names of these fine gentlemen. I have been assured that this is Ben, and this is Levi. Now, Ben Schwartz is the managing head of infrastructure and partnerships for infrastructure and several other things. Close enough? So his job is to get stuff built for OpenAI. Some of you may have heard of OpenAI. It's an AI company, and anyway. So Levi Patterson. Levi Patterson is with a little chip company for gaming called NVIDIA, and he's based here in DC. Yeah, okay, you laugh, but do we have enough power plants? Yeah, okay, so settle down. So Levi Patterson is here in DC with NVIDIA, and before that, I believe you worked on the Hill, and you've basically been kind of around nuclear and other issues for quite some time. So, these gentlemen are here apparently to tell us that we are missing a little bit of the energy we need for AI, but in the script that I just read and memorized, I have an opening question for you both, which is that there are a number of bottlenecks we've heard about for AI. They include labor or, your chips from NVIDIA. But could each of you tell something about maybe when and where you were when you learned that energy was a pretty crucial bottleneck that we did not have a clear way to solve?
Well, all right, this works. I learned that just during that prep session. That was when I... So this should be an interesting panel. As you might have picked up, we had a little bit of a change in the moderator here. But I think this is going to be fun and entertaining. And we are going to talk about the energy bottlenecks. I'm going to share a perspective that comes from OpenAI. We basically are in this competition to build the capacity we need to scale globally. I'm going to talk a little bit about the role of energy in that. But do you have any more sort of comedy to lead off with?
Yeah, okay. So OpenAI, how much energy do you guys think you're going to need, just you guys, 5 years from now and 10 years from now?
Yeah, a lot more energy. I think our CEO was on the Hill not long ago, and he said that the cost of intelligence, because he's made this interesting point that we're in this age of intelligence. We've transitioned from the industrial age to the post-industrial to the age of intelligence. The cost of intelligence in this age is going to eventually default to the cost of energy. And I'll explain a little bit why that's the case. But obviously we need things more in energy. We need some chips. You want to talk about when you learned that chips were important?
Yeah. Back when I was a gamer kid is when I learned how important they were. But yeah, so we're definitely seeing deployment in the U.S. as the primary constraint is energy. So I think when it comes to AI deployment in the U.S., it'll track fairly well with what energy becomes available. And I think it's important to talk a little bit about why data centers, AI factories, what sort of the change that has happened in order to make this such a pressing energy need. And so in the past 10, 15 years ago, the role of data centers in society was generally to fetch you files from some server on the internet, right? So you want to watch a YouTube video, that's a video file that some website and server will help you host and find it and watch. And so there is a meaningful sort of a cap on how much demand for that service that society could reasonably get, right? You can only watch so many videos per day. And what has changed is with the emergence of things like OpenAI, where you can manufacture intelligence. You're literally manufacturing products, and so there's been a different form of data center or AI factory that has emerged where it's creating products. It's creating intelligence that is a valuable good in society, and so. The reason that energy is so important and data centers, I think, get such a big presence in this discussion is because there are a lot of other energy growth sectors, right? Like onshoring manufacturing, electrification. There are a lot of reasons for energy growth, but a lot of the attention goes to data centers and AI factories, and the reason is because we are trying to figure out how to accommodate a very important new manufacturing sector in the grid. And so it's not that AI requires so much energy per se, it's just that we're as a nation thinking, oh gosh, we really need to step up our game on this new manufacturing sector, and we need this new energy for that.
So let me comment a little bit about this, what we need to happen. So one of the things we've learned at OpenAI is leadership in this technology is almost a function of three specific inputs: data, chips, and energy. And the companies in the countries that have access to these three things in the largest quantities are going to be positioned well to either maintain leadership in AI or to obtain leadership. And when it comes to energy, we are just not building the capacity we need to compete globally. If you look at the world, there's really only two sort of poles where this infrastructure is being built at scale. One is sort of in the United States and with our allies and partners, and the other's coming out of Beijing with the infrastructure that they're supporting around the world. And one of the most harrowing sort of statistics that I've seen is when you compare the amount of energy that's being built in China versus what we've done here in the United States. China, one statistic I saw, has built more energy capacity in the last decade than exists here in the United States. And if you look at what they're doing in terms of nuclear power, they have something like 29 or 30 nuclear power plants that they're constructing, and we're barely sort of building that anything here in terms of nuclear right now. We need to really accelerate that innovation and infrastructure build. We also need to work with the financial community to find ways of financing what are truly expensive capital expenditures. There's a big competition to just see who could build the fastest at speed when it comes to not just energy, but the data centers and the infrastructure that goes in them, the chips, and the financing as part of that equation is really important.
Can I be mean for a second? So China is lucky in a way that they were building nuclear plants, they were building wind, solar, not much gas, but coal extremely rapidly, all the way smoothly through the arrival of big AI needs, this uncapped energy demand going to intelligence. So they were building a lot, and then AI barely moves the needle for them. They just keep growing the way they were, and they don't slow down as much as that growth, and they go. For America, we've been leveled out on electricity production for like 20 years. But then there's a small thing. One of the few sectors where there was big year in, year out growth was in let's call it big tech. But only a few years ago, there were nuclear plants in America that were closing because they couldn't get bare bones, just the bare minimum, just to keep the plant open. Not to build it, that's expensive, but just to keep it open. And I'm well aware that big tech was straight up offered cheap, carbon-free power contracts from nuclear plants, being told, if you don't pay these nuclear plants, we're shutting them down. And then it happened. But big tech, you're really just growing almost the same rate. You're just continuing. What is it that changed to take it from 3 years ago, where nobody would lift a finger to save an American nuclear plant, to now, where we're hearing that it's the bottleneck to keeping up in a civilizational race? Like, what is it? Maybe I'm being too mean, but like, what is it that woke people up that wasn't there 3 years ago? Was it literally just that's how fast AI is advancing? Because data centers were a huge growth sector even a few years ago.
So I'm going to toot both of our horns a little bit. Well, not me and you per se, but our companies that we work for. I mean, the first kind of HGX kind of AI scale chip solution was delivered to OpenAI from NVIDIA. And so I think the place in the tech sector that really, where AI was really understood and come from, and the future that we saw was germinated a lot in the relationship of these two companies, and I think that it's taken a while for the understanding of the role that AI can play in society, and not just the role that it can, but how quickly it is changing the world. I think that kind of just took time to propagate, even in the tech sector, even throughout and then through the rest of the country. I don't know what you think about that.
Well, I think sort of a simple response is, if you look at the statistics, like CSIS put out a report earlier this year that said that there were about 5.5 million AI GPUs that were used in AI data centers in the United States last year, and they estimated that by 2030, that demand could be at 80 million, 80 to like 126 million. Even if those statistics are like vastly wrong, and it's still an extraordinary growth projection. So it's just the numbers, the raw numbers of that. And those demand projections for GPU growth correspond with growth in users for OpenAI. We have somewhere around 600 million now weekly active users and continuing to grow. So, I mean, that's the short of it. It's the demand for energy is a direct relationship with the growth with AI and the tech stack that supports it.
So there was an actual meaningful decoupling that you talked about. I mean, so I'm an energy nerd, not an AI nerd. We talk about in the energy space that there's about 100 billion humans worth of energy services being delivered to the 8 billion humans on the planet. And what you're telling me is that we've now got to the point where the missing thing, we got the brawn. In other words, we got the muscle to lift everybody out of poverty and make a great world. What we're now getting is the intelligence, but that itself is going to do something to grow that 100. In other words, we're having mental servants from AI, the mental help, and you're saying that is now, everybody understands, directly connected to whether you can get the energy or not. And America has this standing start. China has a running start. So I have to ask you both. You know that there are people from the Hill here. What is your big ask? If you had one big ask you wanted people to take away from this conference and go get done, what is it that you would ask for NVIDIA or you would ask for from OpenAI on energy to help relieve this bottleneck?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that there are kind of... So, let me back up a little bit. So, the uncertainty of the future can often be a real stymieing force. And so you were asking earlier about if this was such a clear trend, why didn't we act quicker to deploy more energy resources? Well, I mean, I think we're honestly seeing the same thing now in the energy sector, where there's a lot of uncertainty on policy, on costs, what it does is if you're trying to price a specific asset, how much is this worth? There's big error bars on it, and so often that'll discourage people from making a deal. And so I think China, 10 years, to 15 years ago, they knew that they were going to have a very growing manufacturing. There was real clarity, and so they invested as a society immediately. I think we're at that point here in the United States, but that certainty is important. But so you asked about the policy. What policy would I really like to see? I think that one underappreciated issue is the amount that AI can be used to bring in new technologies that have struggled to be commercial. So we've all heard fusion's going to be out there in the future, and it's always 10 years out, or whatever the classic smart person saying is. Well, with AI, AI is critical to the high speed decision making needed to control the plasma, which generates the energy in the fusion reactor. If there's a slight disturbance, you need to act within microseconds or even quicker, and so you need high speed decision making, and that's where I can play a role. But AI can also help you design the reactor in a digital world first. You can digital twin the reactor, make sure that it understands the physics in that digital space, and you can essentially design it in the virtual world before you go in the physical world. And we're seeing that done in manufacturing and energy sectors across industries. And so I think that there is an underappreciated need or opportunity for AI to bring in energy technologies, and that is so it's key that the federal government invests in R&D for AI-enabled and AI-accelerated energy technologies.
So the way I'd answer that question is there's a handful of very clear challenges we face to build at scale. I'll just throw them out, and these are not sort of novel or controversial, like this is generally understood in the community. Transmission lines. Getting transmission lines paid for and permitted is a huge challenge. The general permitting process with NEPA and local interpretations of zoning is a challenge. There are shortages in terms of critical components like turbines that support natural gas. There are issues about labor and getting enough electricians on site and just mobilizing the human capital we need. And then there's just the general sort of organizational structure that this country operates under to get things built, which is highly decentralized in the energy space and can be an impediment to rapid movement. Now, what all of these things have in common, and this gets to your point about the most important issue, if I had to identify one, is that building these AI data centers costs a tremendous amount of capital. Something like, for a 1 gigawatt data center, it could be in the range of $40 to $50 billion. And so what needs to happen is we need to convince the providers of capital that they're going to get a return on their investment in a reasonable period of time. And we face a competitor in terms of the Chinese infrastructure system that is a very different political economy than ours. They can build and allocate that capital without having to worry about quarterly earnings calls and reporting to a public board and even being profitable in a short period of time. While our system requires the accountability to private markets and to capital holders. And so what we need is public-private partnerships that de-risk those capital deployments to support these builds. And that can involve things like loan guarantees, offtake agreements, guarantees that like things will be done in a certain period of time without litigation and other things. But the overall point that I'm trying to make is that we have to de-risk the environment so that we could convince those pools of capital to build these huge infrastructure projects. And the good news is that despite the challenges I've laid out, like this country actually has a history of building big things at scale. We've done, our railway system that crosses the country, the interstate highway system. We've done, the Tennessee Valley Authority type programs. We've done massive, dams and railways. Like we've build big infrastructure projects before that have required government-private collaboration, and there's really no reason we can't do that again with the right focus.
I guess it's some of those big things were the right infrastructure projects for the right era. So in a way, if we had the right compelling agreement across political spectrums, blue states, red states, if there was an agreement in Washington that this was, say, close to an existential risk of getting it wrong, you think that just the way the highway system came together as both defense and commerce and the rail system, in a way, it was the right thing for the right time because it's just very easy and cheap land and you can really punch them through. And it was, are you optimistic that the word is getting out, not just for the upside and the positives that AI can bring to energy technologies as a service, but there's an awareness that if we get it wrong or we miss out, the cost to America is extremely large. Do you think that that's going to create the moment that we need to overcome the barriers to transmission siting? Or even there are people that don't think we need something like the Loans Program Office, which I'm a big fan of as a nuclear guy. I think it can be a great value for taxpayers. You'll hear about it in one of our later panels. Do you think that you're seeing what you want to see? That this moment is going to be understood as an emergency and that we're going to get the infrastructure you need at OpenAI for the Stargate centers, for example, or that you're going to have enough energy that the customers that want your chips are going to be able to actually turn them on? What do you think? Are you optimistic?
I'd say one thing that's really encouraging is the amount of bipartisan focus on AI in Washington right now. This is a big country. There's a lot of things that we could focus on, but there's actually a surprising amount of focus on all the things we've discussed. So that's quite encouraging. But we need to do more than talk about it. Things have to change. Like, we need to deal with the permitting issue. We have to allow more nuclear to be built in terms of all the bottlenecks you're familiar with in terms of the design approval process and et cetera. So it's much easier to predict the past than to predict the future. So I'm not going to say that we could be sure what's going to happen, but there's a lot of encouraging signs right now that we should be optimistic about.
You're just saying we are by no means to where we need to be to get it done.
Yeah, we're not where we need to be, but there's also the impediments that I've identified aren't they can be overcome. We have a history of being able to deal with things like that if we devote the time and the focus, which there's no reason we shouldn't be able to do.
I want to quickly revisit, you talked about the loan program office and the role that it plays in the energy sector. And it's a really interesting program because it recognizes that there are a lot of innovators who don't necessarily have kind of billion-dollar balance sheets to go leverage, to go get financing, to make a reality their really cool and interesting energy ideas that could that could support our infrastructure. And I think that's I'm a little envious of that idea, because I mean we see that world in the data center. There is a consensus that GPUs and AI infrastructure is going to be a growing necessary investment for the United States. And so there are companies going out there, with small balance sheets around, trying to build data centers and try to make deals in that world. And that loan program office, I think, could play an interesting. I don't know exactly what it is, but that financing role that the loan program has played for the energy sector, I think there's an interesting discussion to have about what it could play for energy and AI together.
In fact, that's what, you mentioned this uncapped energy need now that intelligence is energy directly. I mean, look, I remember a long time ago when I was young in 2020, 2021, the phrase went, energy, what? No. The world runs on software. Well, what does the software run on? So now we have this group understanding. I like how you said that, because I think that the understanding that say a loans program office loan to build a new type of nuclear plant or to deploy at scale in a different way or something deserving of the remit of the office, you're not just deploying energy. Now that energy is intelligence, you're saying that although it'd be fun to have a LPO for AI specifically, you're saying you basically do. To the extent that LPO does big energy or any legislation does big energy, you're saying that now that is the same as doing AI or winning in the AI race. So LPO as an example, as a stand-in
I think
for
you could
programs.
even look at broadening the focus of a program like LPO to make that, because yes, you use energy. Data center AI factories will convert essentially that work into a good that is a token that comes out of a data center, and that token has it's dollar per token, or you can even measure it in energy per token that comes out of it. And so I think that yes, the LPO serves that role for the energy infrastructure. I think that that would be helpful if it looked broader than that, if it looked at actually integrating it with the data center world and trying to figure out how we could help finance the offtake too.
Got it. Okay, final words, gentlemen. Ben, last message you have. You said what you want is, go for it. Summarize.
We need, it would be very, very helpful for the U.S. government to do what it can to unlock private capital markets through de-risking the time and litigation risk of building, and providing potentially loan guarantees and other things that will crowd in this private capital so we could just build faster.
Got it. So you're saying immense amount of private capital, huge recognition of what the problem is, huge desire to invest in productive infrastructure. It's the stability or the assurance that they can get their money in and stuff actually gets built that you're saying you want from Congress. Okay. Yeah. Levi?
Yeah, so I started my career as a nuclear engineer in the late 2010s, or early 2010s, sorry. And that was during the nuclear renaissance days, which never really happened because we kind of had stagnant energy demand and the economics weren't great there. And so my parting message is that I think energy demand driven by AI, electrification, manufacturing is an enormous opportunity to commercialize all these energy resources that we've been talking about and have been excited for a long time. I think that if we would have had this energy demand 15 years ago, we would be in a much stronger place from a energy portfolio perspective. And so energy demand's great.
Thank you very much, gentlemen.